Canada is 13 economies, including one of the most important, which is Quebec, which is threatened very particularly by the tariffs, which have been touching Quebec for a long time, and these sectors targeted by Mr. Trump touch Quebec a lot. In that spirit, our offer, we've said it, we want to formalize it, is that in the delegation of Canadian negotiations, there should formally be a Quebec presence, not a Quebec delegation that is different. It's not going to work that way. But we can be an ally in the negotiations. However, an ally must be treated equally, which would require the Quebec government, and Mr. Legault asked for it as well, the choice of certain of the participants that they should be Quebecers within the delegation to negotiate in Washington. So that is the sense of our request, and it's added to other measures. I said it again because they are adding up and could together, if they were taken by an eventual Canadian Parliament, it should be an important contribution to the position of Quebec and Canada face, as we said, a mirror to the Buy American Act, which is big contracts for the Canadian state, and businesses sponsored by the Canadian should have Canadian content. The comparable program to the subsidy efforts for diversifications of the market, efforts for productivity of businesses, a support to R&D and the digital transformation, and resources that are purely Quebecer. So all of that together with a formal Quebec participation to the Canadian delegation would position, that is our position. We've also said, we will reiterate, we are favorable, and we'll see how Mr. Carney will position himself. We are favorable to this dollar for dollar, of course, but by being careful to create exceptions for certain particularly vulnerable sectors, like those who've done presentations with me, for example, aerospace, certain food and industrial that buy parts that are essential to their production that comes from the U.S. and would be hurt by the counter tariffs, but we can afford in Quebec to focus, to target, rather than being rather than doing everything. And we also think that Canada should work quickly to speak to partners that we can easily identify, including whose cumulative GDP and whose cumulative population are more significant than the American GDP, so that counter tariffs that are imposed are particularly difficult for the American economy to take, who is exposed by putting tariffs to everybody. They're exposed to an inflation that will be impossible to control, with, once again, an impact on Canada and Quebec's economy. So I will reiterate the request. I credit the request of the Quebec government to have a specific selection of Quebec members in the Canadian delegation, and I reiterate to Quebecers that they have in their hands the possibility to exercise major control in future negotiations to make sure that there are no deals without Quebec. And this will go through the number of MPs that they will choose for the bloc on Quebec territory, and they could end up with the balance of power, and by saying, as a good, reasonable, moderate partner, as a good partner, participate in the negotiations, making sure there are no scenarios where the Quebec economy is just there to make Mr. Trump happy with in the negotiations with the U.S. So there were a lot of things to say.